Hi, Ruben. So Ruben will address the topic of privacy. Ruben is a data privacy and protection specialist, so based in Brussels with keen interest in the Web3 technologies. He's also the co-initiator of the My Data Brussels Hub and will present views on privacy and how it should be understood. So Ruben, please.
All right. Can everybody hear me well?
Yes, I can hear you.
Oh, okay, perfect. I'll share my screen for the sake of having a bit of slides to support what I'm going to say. And sharing screen one. All right. And I should go to presenter mode. The irony of presenting slides on Google when talking about privacy, but that brings me to the first point of privacy and convenience. So for today's talk, the title that we went with is Privacy Issues for Developers. So Shert has suggested that, and I thought of it like, to what extent am I the right person to talk about privacy issues for developers? What do we mean by privacy issues for developers? It's not that that developers have a problem or an issue with privacy, I guess. But there are some interesting perhaps angles to touch upon in the intersection of privacy and code, and then code would for me be the substitute of developers, or what developers in the abstract form stand for. So just a little bit about myself, as Shert has already indicated, I'm based in Brussels, and I'm the co-initiator of the My Data Brussels Hub. I have a keen interest indeed in data privacy and data governance, the intersection of the two. So data privacy and protection is where I started my career in GDPR. So I gained interest in the GDPR back in 2014 when I first heard about it. At the time when I was studying, my studies were more in the economics and IT related fields. But I heard about the GDPR topic, and it sparked my interest. So I did my master's thesis on the topic of what the impact of the privacy regulation that was just being drafted then would be on the field of information management. So specifically for commercial classic companies. So at that point, I wasn't really aware of the Web3 and the decentralized space yet. And that's why in the course of the years, my focus has been on data privacy and protection in the classic sense, let's say. So how do companies that have specific architectures in place, how do they adapt to the new regulation, and what exactly does it mean for them to have to comply with these new laws? And over the course of the years, I actually started to realize that privacy and the legal aspects of data privacy were only really a part of the puzzle. So I gained interest in political economy, also more in what exactly the technologies that could help us with scaling this issue were. And so I naturally ended up with interest, or with diving deeply in the Web3. So that's basically a bit of my curriculum so far. And through the My Data Brussels Hub and the My Data community in general, I think I'm very happy to be surrounded by a lot of experts in different fields, and really, as Jana has also indicated or pointed out, it's the collaborative or the multi-stakeholder environment that really makes it interesting. And so, as I said, the topic of GDPR or data privacy issues for developers is a bit of a challenging one in a way, because it forced me to think about the fact that we all have our specific angles to look at things. And I think it's probably relevant to just take a bit of a helicopter view and look at what is actually at stake and what we mean by privacy, what we mean by code, what we mean by law. I'm not going to explain all of it because I don't probably fully grasp all of the concepts myself. But there are some interesting frameworks to just use as a guidance in this. I'm just going to try and see if I can get. Okay. So the saying of code is law is quite an interesting one. It shows that there's a lot at play here. We have bits and bytes, and then we have what we call law, which is a more old world or a concept that's way older than code. And as Jana has also indicated or pointed out, I think most of the current challenges or the turmoils that we're facing as society, it's basically because people speaking the language of code and people speaking the language of law, business, and other areas, they have not found a way to actually use the same terminology yet and to translate what have been considered best practices. And so all the principles on which regulation is based, and not only privacy regulation, but also competition law, other types of law and ethics. I think as humans, we intuitively really understand what all of that means. It's just that the sort of architectures that we're using or that we're depending more and more heavily upon, and of course, by that I'm referring to the digital architecture that's basically dominating our lives. It's all forming like part of our sphere of influence, but also all of those forces are kind of impacting and regulating us. And so Lawrence Lessig, who wrote codes of law in cyberspace, or codes of cyberspace and other laws, has this prophetic dot theory, which kind of visualizes all of that. And in the middle here, the prophetic dot in this case is actually us as individuals. So what you see is that the individual, and in this presentation, the individual would be hypothetically a technical person that's developed that's developed a lot of skills in programming and developing. This person also has these forces working upon him. But also us as regular citizens or non-technical people are facing the same forces. And so law is one of the forces that regulates this environment. And by regulation or by regulating, we just mean exerting agency over or giving agency to. The market is another one. The market is pricing what is good behavior, or is pricing good ideas or ideas that might be very very profitable in the future. On the other hand, we have architecture, which is also multifaceted. So biology, or just the physical environment, is part of our architecture, but more and more the technologies that enhance this environment and augment it are increasingly part of that sphere of influence and that sphere of regulating things. And then there's the norms and the ethics by which a society is guided. That if I do something wrong, then there's a society or people around me that might indicate that that's against some of our commonly agreed upon norms. And that's a bit of the four major actors in a society at work. And what we see is that if we're focusing too much on one side of this four-angled diagram, then it gets out of balance. And I think what we're realizing now is that the architectural and the market side of things has been gaining a lot of traction over the last few decades. And actually the norms, which we still intuitively understand that are there, and the laws that are physically or that are in place, actually have decreased in their harnessing capabilities or their harnessing possibilities, and that's probably the balance that we have to restore. And so in the context of the Web3, I think it's interesting to see that there is actually a very important change, or a very important paradigm shift that's currently being undertaken, and that's accelerated by COVID, of course. And that is that the protocols that underlie all of the applications and all of the architecture that was mentioned in the previous slide. The protocols before were basically mostly captured in the application layer, and that's why the protocols that were beneath, so the TCP/IP protocol, HTML, and HTTPS, etc., they were thin protocols in the sense that the applications built on top of them have been able to exert power over us in their captive, or the way in which they have been able to capture attention and to harness the network effects that come with social media and the likes. What we see now with blockchain is that the value that's captured by the ecosystem at large is way more positioned on the protocol layer, and so the regulatory power that comes from the protocol and the design of the protocol is actually bigger now than the regulatory power that comes from applications in the Web2 environments, because the regulatory power of Google, Facebook, and other big companies is of course very, very noticeable, and we see that just by looking at the market cap of some of the bigger tokens, that the majority of the value is in the tokens themselves, so in the layer 1 tokens, so to say, and then there's applications on top of them. But most of the applications and most of the promising startups that are predicated on using Web3 protocols, their value is proportionately way smaller than the value of some of the bigger winners in the Web2 sphere. And that's an interesting shift in power, because it means that the underlying infrastructure, the soft infrastructure, so to say, is actually where the focus is and should be. And the good thing about decentralization, of course, is that it's a shift in who holds the power over those networks, because it's more evenly spread, and it's a commonly managed infrastructure, and that's why some of the authors that I'm quite interested in lately have been saying that coins, or the cryptocurrency language that's used is a bit unfortunate, because actually it's networks and it's infrastructure that we're basically talking about. And so infrastructure is a very powerful means to actually change forces in that same society. And so, as I said, my sphere of interest and my professional expertise thus far has focused on data governance. And data governance in itself is a term that a lot of people interpret differently, but in the context that I've been using it myself so far, it's basically meaning all kinds of frameworks, regulations, and rules from a top-down perspective in large companies that determine what the data generation, storage and analysis, including the legal and administrative directives of the data infrastructure should entail. And so in companies, you of course have top level or top down policies that regulate all of that, and they have to take into account the regulations outside of their sphere. So in society, that have to be translated in internal policies. But there's more at play. Of course, there's also the market itself, which is a regulating force and which exerts a sort of power over the data governance inside a company. There's also the ethics, and then there's the technical rules of what can we actually achieve with the database architectures that we have as a means or as available to us. And the reason I'm bringing up data governance or governance as a concept is that I think one of the pitfalls for developers and for technical people in the Web3 space is to go from the assumption that because of the innovations that are possible in blockchain related technologies, that this idea of governance has become obsolete, and that we can obey, or that we can just disregard any form of politics, that no politics are at play anymore in the regulation of the infrastructure for the Web3. And I would like to bring a bit of a counter argument for that, because I'm quite convinced that the power has been shifting, or the power is shifting from applications and from centralized technologies or from centralized companies, so to say, to decentralized ones. But even the decentralized environment is regulated by a group of people that's at the core of the development of the protocols that underpin that infrastructure. And the decisions that these developers make also have very large impact in society. So I think it's important to understand that the technologies or the infrastructure that we're developing here is not neutral in its design. And that's why I think initiatives and associations such as the Swarm community and the Fair Data Society are very important in that regard, because I think the main objective of these organizations is to point towards that, towards the fact that ideological biases might still influence the direction that these technologies take in the future. And then it's not just a deterministic given that just by the nature of having a decentralized technology that society would become more fair as a result. It still very much depends on how we design or how we go by these principles to design the infrastructure. I'm just looking at the time. And so I think if you're still following, on the right hand side we had the law and so the legal regulations. And in that sense, I think the GDPR is a very good starting point, because talking about the responsibility of developers and of technically enabled people to build technologies that will form the infrastructure or the shared infrastructure for the decades to come. I think it's important to understand that principles are the key building block, or the key element to take into account. And so the principles in the GDPR are interesting because they are based on human rights and principles that come from human rights law. And so fairness, transparency, purpose limitation, data minimization, accuracy, storage limitation, and security are the main ones that we find in the GDPR. The articles and the recitals are mentioned here. But the interesting part is that Anke Vukje and her team have actually drafted 7 foundational principles of what is called privacy by design. And so they are mentioned, or they're shown on this slide, and I took the freedom to use a slide of Deloitte here. You might recognize the colors. And so the first principle is that we should always work proactively and not reactively, and anticipate current or anticipate possible problems. So things should be preventative and not remedial. We should lead with privacy as the default setting. It should be embedded in the design, and that's an interesting one, because I think the design itself goes all the way to the layer 1 protocol, because we're probably oftentimes mistaken in thinking that design of an application is equally important, it has the same value as design of the protocol. But I think there's a limit to what we can achieve with privacy embedment of the design of applications, that we should really go all the way to the protocol. So that's a good thing to take into account. And then there's some other ones, but the practical ramifications of these can be seen as such. And I've used Jaap Henk Hoopman's open sourced methodology for this, and he's actually taken the principles set forth by Anke Vukje and her team one step further and translated them in data-oriented strategies that focus on the privacy-friendly processing of data themselves, or of the data itself. So these 4 are more technical in nature, and then the process ones are more operational and organizational in nature. So the data-oriented ones just say that we need to minimize data. So if we can do the same thing with less data, then it's always optimal to go for the minimal subset of data. We need to separate the data as much as possible to make sure that it's harder to identify or combine data in the end. Then we need to abstract. So if we can make abstractions of certain data and aggregate, that's always preferred. And then we need to hide data from unauthorized or from eyes that should not see it. So that's a bit of sometimes a difficult thing to achieve, of course, in blockchain related environments. And then in terms of the processes, you will see that the processes focus on the relation with the data subject, and then the relation with the data controller. And that's where, of course, architectures such as the My Data operator one or very relevant pieces of work. So the inform principle says that we should always inform a data subject so as to minimize the information asymmetry that might result in power imbalances and loss of agency. And then the other one's control, so we should provide the data subject with adequate control, but even then control is a sort of very abstract principle to take into account. But I think I'm almost reaching the hour, so I should come to a close. There's one more element that I think is relevant for developers and for technical people, and that's to realize that the Web3 is, in essence, and I'm using the words of Chairman Vojengir here. It's really a socio-economic revolution, whereas the Web2 was more of a front-end technical revolution. The Web2 will be more in the back end. And will be all about merging and really bridging the gap that's currently existing between the technical world and the human world. And hopefully we can do this, but it will only be possible if we embed principles if we embed principles, sorry, my microphone was gone. If we embed principles in the design of the tokens that form the sort of structural building block and the most fundamental building block of the Web3. And so probably token economics and token engineering will be one of those engineering practices that's going to raise a lot of traction in the coming years. And I hope that in the process of engineering tokens, which is of course in its nature a technical, or we would be inclined to think that it's a technical activity, that we really understand that it's important to have this multi-stakeholder consulting model with that, and to not only let the engineers or the technically skilled people define what is going into the engineering or in the design of tokens. So I would really like to point towards the book of Shermin Vojgmir on token economics. Her work is fantastic in really showing that decentralization and commonly managed infrastructure comes with a range of new possibilities, also new threats, but that the frameworks that we've been using so far in terms of governing our societies should be not replaced, maybe replaced in the long term, but really be amended by new frameworks that take into account these engineering principles for the Web3. And that's where I'm going to end my kind of discourse here. If there's any questions, of course, I'm very happy to help.
Thank you, Ruben, for your interesting presentation. Yes, if there are any questions. I would have a quick one otherwise. So, so decentralized technologies, do you think by themselves, will they be enough for improving on privacy and data governance? What do they bring to the table?
I think what they bring to the table is architectural building blocks for embedding these principles of privacy, and then also the sub-principles of minimization, accountability, transparency. I think the inherent nature of Web3 technologies and the transparency, the lineage that they can provide it's where their strength is. But in themselves, they will never be sufficient to do so. But they have inherent characteristics that are not available in other technologies. So immutable ledgers, in that sense, definitely form a key component if they are combined with legal engineering, and if it's not just a one-sided story, let's say. But privacy is it's a complex word in itself, because I think even academics are not fully aligned with all of the potential ways in which you can view privacy. There's different paradigms: privacy as control, privacy as practice, privacy as confidentiality. And depending on who you ask, you will get a different answer of what exactly is privacy. I personally, I prefer talking about agency, and agency it's a much more, I think, easily understandable concept for most people, because if you ask people, do you think privacy is important? Then we end up with the privacy paradox, where people say yes, it's important, but they let it be violated day in, day out. But if you talk about agency and democratic oversight or democratic participation, and if you would ask people, like, if your privacy is eroded over time, so it would mean that you don't have a democratic say anymore in the regulation of society, would you mind? I think that's a different way of phrasing it, and I think democracy in itself can be considered an end, and privacy is a means toward that end. So if we talk about privacy, that's it's my opinion. I'm not saying that that's correct, but that's how I view it. And I think the point I'm trying to make is that democracy is it's an infinite game, and I think the principles of democracy are self-steering or self-healing in a way, or self-regulating, and making sure that we constantly take into account new things. And I think blockchains and Web3 technologies definitely enable us to do governance at scale and to work in trustless environments, but they will never, I think, outsource trust or outsource the need for governance. Yeah, so they are helpful and very powerful building blocks, but governance will always be needed as long as there's humans that have a keen interest in having agency in a sort of environment, I guess.
Thank you. So we actually have 2 more questions. Although we ran out of time, I think we should maybe dedicate a couple of more minutes to try to tackle this. So thank you for the talk. Would you say that privacy by design has become a moral responsibility for developers and a must-have? And additionally, how about data sovereignty?
So I think a moral responsibility, it lays a lot of responsibility with designers. I think we all have a responsibility, and I think communities like this exist to make sure that developers that feel this moral responsibility and that are aware of it can find the right information and can liaise with people outside of their usual sphere, so to say. But the same goes for non-technical or legal people. I think we all have these inherent biases, or these not fears, but these I think biases are the best way to describe it. That we will only seek or primarily seek viewpoints and other people's perspective that enforce our own. So I think if we can build communities where these stakeholders from all walks of life can find themselves or can find each other and collaborate on things based on a common language, then that moral responsibility of one party in and of themselves will not be seen as the only pressing point, so to say. And I think we're all looking for answers, and nobody has the entire picture. So if we can collaborate on it and support each other wherever needed, be it in technical or non-technical worlds, then we can only progress as a result, I guess.
Thank you.
But privacy by design, is one of those principles, definitely to take into account from now on.
So Robert said he has met Mr. Hepman and liked his work on IRMA. Technically, we have the opportunities to design as privacy-minded as possible. In your opinion, having experience close to the legal developments, do we have the legal framework EU-wide in place to cultivate such paradigms?
I really believe that the legal framework it's never finished, but there's always the question of to what extent can you operationalize your policies. And that's where I think, to me, the parallel between my work in multinational companies as well that have very ambitious policies and strategies. The point of a strategy is always that it's useless without execution, and I think the parallel with legal frameworks is the same. If the enforcement mechanisms, for one, that we have, and the architectures to enable the actual embedment of the principles on which the regulation is based, if that bridge is not made, then we can make the best regulations and the best policies, but we will never be able to practically reap the rewards So I think that's probably where the focus of regulators and democratic institutions should also lie in finding ways to bridge that gap and to really look at the fact that we're regulating top down, but there should be bottom up capacities to deal with that regulation as well, and probably other types of policy instruments, such as an industrial strategy or a large scale mobilization of in the European sense, then European enterprises is needed as well, and that's where projects like Gaia-X can make the difference. If the collaboration between the regulatory forces and then the technology enablers on the field can work together, that's where the real value lies, I think. Yeah.
Thank you, Ruben, for your presentation and your answers.